Hey guys. So now we're moving on to evaluation question 7, which is looking back at your preliminary task, what do you feel that you've learned in the progression from it to the full product? And Olivia's going to start us off.
Well, to begin with, the difference that we had when we were doing our actual filming in comparison to our preliminary task is that we used a tripod instead of using it handheld all the time, because for our preliminary task we didn't even really think about using a tripod, but when we did actually decide to use it in our final piece, we found it steadied the camera. It made the quality of the shots a lot better in comparison to our preliminary, which it wasn't. It was a bit shaky. The shots wasn't very strong, so the tripods definitely helped. We we used handheld rigs and stuff.
Yeah.
We used handheld rigs instead of like just using a normal phone for
Or your
preliminary.
hand. So going on to what Olivia said, so handheld rigs, it meant that in terms of the chase sequence and things like that, or when a character's moving when we're filming, instead of just holding your phone up and filming like this, we could actually move and there will be less shake.
It's more balanced
To the shots, which obviously that's something we heavily learned, that we can use equipment to make our shots better, and we don't actually have to do that much to them to really make them better, and it saves us a lot of time in post production.
Especially don't need less need to stabilise the shots and stuff like that, because if you use a tripod then we can eliminate that and we can cut down our editing time by using more sturdier shots in the first place.
Furthermore, our sequence, how we planned it, was meant to be filmed at night, so we get this idea of this like kind of thriller. It's already dark, and kind of trying to establish those genre connotations. So in terms of filming at night, obviously we looked into using lights and things like that for certain areas, but we didn't have them at school, and we didn't have the budget to go out and buy loads of artificial lights to light up a certain scene.
It's
So
a
what
small British film company.
So what we did was, when we were looking and going for our location recce, we were able to find areas that had really good natural, like really good artificial light, and that meant that we eliminated all of those problems. Whereas if we look back to our preliminary task, we didn't, especially in terms of location, we just did it in school. We didn't really think about the location and how that has an impact on obviously the general narrative, um, and how it helps you establish these genre connotations and all of these different things. So another thing would be obviously filming at night and how we were able to do that, but also how we thought more about setting and more about where we're filming our sequence and why we're using these certain settings. Um, Another thing would be, really, we used a high quality camera. In our preliminary task, looking back, we just used a mobile phone, which isn't the best camera. Obviously, these mobile phones, iPhones now are 1080p, but they weren't the best, so we used a better camera. Fair enough, we didn't use the best camera we could have used. We didn't have them available. They weren't at school at the time, so we had to find something from somewhere. So we used a bridge camera, which was 720p, but there was a lot of noise in the shots. And things like that, because it was really hard to edit the settings on the camera to try and get it to like the ISO to do the right thing we wanted. So obviously we could have done it better, but looking back to the opening sequence, to like our preliminary task, the camera we used was a lot better, and that allowed us to get higher quality shots, and really make use of the equipment such as tripods, and these handheld rigs that fit those type of cameras. Okay.
For post production, for our editing, we used a really basic software like Windows Movie Maker, which in comparison to our actual piece, we used a lot more higher like technology software. We used Final Cut Pro, which it made the editing process a lot better. Whereas Windows Movie Maker, it didn't really have as many technical stuff that we could have used. Like there's not a lot of putting in like filters and stuff like that in it. The Movie Maker, it was the basics of the basics, but yeah, and we added in like music and things like that with the post production, which was with the help of help of Final Cut Pro. It made it a lot easier. We could add in extra non-diegetic sound that we couldn't have probably added in Windows Movie Maker. there's a lot more sound effects as well in Windows Movie Maker. Yeah.
Also, adding on to it, one of the big things in our preliminary task was the ambient sound that was stuck in by the camera's microphone. Looking at that, if you look at our actual opening sequence, there's none of that. We took that all out and we used like a soundtrack to go over it, so we didn't need it. Also, the soundtrack, which we didn't use in our preliminary task, it looked quite jagged and quite cut up. Whereas, do you know what I mean? The soundtrack helped us to knit those shots together and make it look a lot more fluid.
I think I found from the preliminary task as well that although our preliminary task was near enough the same length as our opening sequence, I felt that the shots dragged out a lot more. And ever since doing the preliminary task, we learned that the smaller the shots can add more effect to it as well, and it's a lot harder to create a clearer narrative when using when having a preliminary task in comparison to when you've actually planned it all out and you've mapped out what exactly you're going to do. But it definitely did show like a different point that you need to sit down and think about it properly, and yeah.
Also, like continuity, in some of the preliminary tasks, the match on action was a bit jagged as well, and we were able to do that via like our editing software, Final Cut Pro, which is more precise in terms of cutting the scenes down, and the shots down, so you're able to get that instant transition from the bit where he opens the car door. It's instant. It looks really good, and I think like just summing it up in terms of in our actual sequence, it's a lot longer and there's a lot more space and time to fill, and it's harder to create the negative over that. But you can see that we planned, we put the time in, whereas with our preliminary test, we didn't plan it. We just went straight in. We're like, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. We didn't really plan it. We didn't plan locations. In terms of sound, it was really basic. We didn't take the ambient sound in. We didn't have a soundtrack. We didn't add these sound effects, and you can really see that. But we can see that we've progressed a lot in terms of our use of technologies and our use of the editing softwares and things like that to really make our final product a lot better than that preliminary task. If you look at the things that we've pointed out, we've established and gone beyond what we said we'd do.
I think as well that with our preliminary task, we cut out unnecessary shots and unnecessary time that we didn't really need. Like if there's like a long shot of someone walking to somewhere, with our final piece, if it was like a walking space, we'd cut it down, add in different like fades and effects and stuff like that. With our preliminary task, it's very basic and really boring. But with like using, like, as I said, software like Final Cut Pro, we were able to add in different fades, different effects to make it more interesting and more exciting for the audience in comparison to our preliminary, which is very boring, very basic, and didn't really have much like flow to it as well.
So in summary, we've learnt loads from our preliminary task and using that and looking back at it. So